have among us Pedro Alcántara, Director of Elderly Insurance for Social Security of the Dominican Republic and Vice President of Financing Commission. Welcome. And Doctora Manta Mosal, researcher of the Internado de Colombia that has joined us in these 4 days of activities. Thank you, Doctora Monsalvo, and Cohen Blenning, coordinator of development of social knowledge initiative of the European Union for Social Security and Employment. Welcome, Mr. Cohen, again. I want to thank you for joining us today in this on site because it is very important to have our membership with us. Without further ado, I want to start with the first presentation, Armando Perez Gonzalez of Strategy, so he can introduce our speaker. Well, thank you, Madam Advisor and board member. I want to recall our audience that all panels are available in Spanish, English, and Portuguese in Zoom and in the social media for the conference. We want to tell you that all the attendees by Zoom have 80% of assistants will be receiving a certificate for the activities of this week. We want to thank Cristian Alfredo Orozco from the University Externado de Colombia that will be talking about the research cycle of Social Security promotion as a tool to have Social Security coverage. Inter-American media, the analysis of the floors that comes as a fundamental tool that has been defined by the International Labor Union, ILO, and this initiative is to have a broader coverage for social securities, addressing well-being and social development, explore what are the floors of Social Security, detailing the inclusion and equity to access to Social Security, provide a frame for the exchange of experiences and best practices among the different countries of the region. To this regard, the analysis of this tool is crucial in order to move forward to Social Security system that will be more sound in our region. Without further ado, I will introduce our speaker, Cristian Alfredo Orozco. He is a lawyer. He has a master in industrial relations, and he has a diploma from the University Externado de Colombia. He has a PhD from the same university, and he has been working on social security and labor. He is a researcher of the Department of Labor Development, and he is advisor to labor rights. Thank you, Christian, and you have the floor. Thank you. I don't know if you can hear me properly. Yes, we can hear you a little bit low, but yes, we can hear you. Well, thank you. I will allow to share my presentation on the screen. Can you confirm that you can view it? Yes, we can view the presentation on the screen. Well, having covered all these technical issues, I want to thank the CISS for invitation for me and for the University Externada de Colombia to attend this space that is so important to discuss about crucial issues such as social security and the changes that it is undergoing, not only in Colombia and inter-American sector, but worldwide as well. I want to thank you again for the space and allowing me to share some of our thoughts on the social protection floors. I have been introduced, but in order to start my presentation, I was wondering yesterday how I'm going to be introducing the presentation, and a little bit of before beginning is by giving you the name of the department I'm working. That is Labor Rights and Social Security Department. And what does this department name has to do with protection floors, well, it's precisely that the concept, and I think it's not only my concept, but many researchers on this subject matter. Social security is just a part of labor law or rights, and that is a generation that has created so many difficulties and problems on social security issues because of how we have conceived social security. We have been considering a part and subtopic within labor law or labor rights. And there is not a limitation theoretical, but it is practical limitation because from the conception and design of the system, we have been limiting the field of work of social security for the people that are performing an employment, a remunerated activity, depending or independently, with all the specifics that can be shown here. But we have always, or traditionally, we have dealt with social security as part of labor law. And what does it have to do with protection floors? Because of the approaches of social security that have been limited, as I'm calling them, just covering the workers, we are presented with difficulties in coverage. And here I will be referring to, because it's not a secret, in Latin America, the unemployment guarantee of rights is not there. People that should be covered are outside of the protections that should be granted by social security system, and that is precisely where the protection floors come in place as a tool to look for universality and have an extended coverage of social security. In addition, to give you the figure of protection floor and how it has been covered nationally and in Colombia, I wanted to bring these thoughts as food for thought because we have a consensus. There's an agreement between doctrine and those experts that have said that we have a challenge, a great challenge before us in order to dissolve the way that we have been working with social securities because we have very difficult, many practical difficulties that we will be faced with. I have divided my presentation in 5 parts. The presentation of social protection floors, and then what OIT has mentioned. We have a recommendation of year 2012. It's a little bit old, but we continue to study that figure. We are going to see what the ILO has said to that regard in order to see what are the issues regarding social security coverage, not only at a national level, but on international level. And then I will present the Colombian case. And then on the fifth item, I will be telling you why the protection floors, we have a tool that will enable us to activate all our goals on this subject matter. Social protection floors, the theoreticians say, come from the insufficiency of social security systems at a domestic level. Why? But because of many reasons. I had already introduced some of you during my introduction, but informality, unemployment, lack of access to minimum rights that should be guaranteeing the decent subsistence of an individual. So social security is low on coverages, in subjective and objective coverages. Why? Because it does not cover, as I have been saying, all the people that it should be covering. And we cannot cover all the risks that we intend to cover. That is why we start talking about the social protection floors. What for? What is the purpose of those social security floors? As I have been already saying, the aim is to guarantee the gradual or piecemeal inclusion of social protection floors. If social security systems at present are insufficient, because of economic limitations, labor market, and other issues, social security systems are insufficient. So we have to look for tools that will enable, to a certain extent, guarantee the minimum social security to those people because of the activity they perform. Their activities cannot have access to formal labor market, so they cannot enjoy and have the benefits of social security. So it social protection floor is defined as the first level that will be integrated to social protection, then should be looking to guarantee the access to services and goods that are essential, that have been designed at a national level. The same that should be guaranteeing decency for the inhabitants of a specific territory. What does ILO telling us? ILO, as I was telling you, in 2012, issued a recommendation 202. That recommendation reads expressly that the member states of the ILO should, in a near future, establish or design in the internal application social protection flow that will include the basic on social security matters. And that's where the floor name comes about, because in a state of law, the rule of law and guaranteeing human rights, there should be nothing below those social protection floors, and that is guaranteeing the basics. So yes, we have ILO goes beyond that and it specifies what those social protection tools should include. And then it's saying that in the development of the forums is telling us, well, depend on the efforts and economics of each of the countries, what they can do. But we should have as a minimum, and the ILO says, what we consider as minimum is health care. It's only talking about care. It's not talking about financial benefits. To have security in income and access to goods and services that are described as a minimum that a person should have in order to have a decent way of living on a domestic level. That is a recommendation of the ILO. They give us the parameters, telling us about the principles while designing the social security floors. But in order not to exceed the time that has been allotted to me for the presentation, I'm just referring to these most important items in this presentation. Moving forward to social security system worldwide and the difficulties we are faced with worldwide and how coverage is done at a domestic level. And here the thoughts are not only centered on Colombia, because precisely because of the nationality, because of the country, because of the quality of our attendees to this event, all of a sudden I wanted to bring figures that will reflect the worldwide condition and not the out of my country. And so I will be showing you what are the difficulties that the principle of universality has at a global level. First item, it is very important because certainly all the attendees and the persons that are joining us online, they have the concept of social security coverage. It is very important to give you the differences. Why? Because precisely one of the very important items of my presentation is to say, why should we extend the coverage of social security systems in order to consider it as universal, because the internal legislation of many countries are now including, and there are different authors, that social protection is a concept that is broader. What am I referring to? Social protection is including social security. Social security is within social protection, and that brings us to the minimum of human decency, charity, and other kind of protections of social uh, security come about. And then that is on the social security side. And now we have developed internally within the country the existence of different systems, systems that have limited coverage, that have severe voids and failures. And we have to show them. That is the purpose of the presentation. We have to have a better coverage of social protection, unlike social security. And so, social protection is the concept of non-contributable benefits. So, I wanted to bring your attention to the difference of social protection and social security. And that is why floors are called floors of social protection. And in Colombia and worldwide, vis-a-vis the social security systems, are what I was already saying. At domestic level, Colombia, the legislation in place say that it is compulsory to have affiliates. All the persons that have an income that is worth one minimum wage. Starting with the exclusion that the law has, the persons that are earning less than one minimum wage are excluded from social security systems. And that is one of the great difficulties that social security has, not only in Colombia, and I would dare to say that several of the countries that are members of this conference. That is why we have been opening the road to the concept to delaborize social security, as we are saying, because the fact that it is included on labor, on social security within our systems, we have designed a very reduced enforcement. The cost that it has had, the tax pressure that Social Security has had on the countries is very high. And I dare to talk about the Colombian case, the national budget that is defined by the President of the Republic to allot all the sectors during 1 year. An estimate is around 30% goes to pension payment, and I will be thoroughly explaining it later on. In spite of the people that are contributing and are helping to finance those pensions, 30% of the budget goes to the person that are already receiving their pension, that are already retired. Social security system, because of the way that have been implemented, is not an easy task for any country. We have to design a figure that has been prepared by ILO to start with extending the coverage, and in one blow, as we say in my country, once and for all, go in full with a social security system by an extension of social protection coverage. I have cited the minimum according to international standards for social security system. The minimum that should be protecting on the contingencies that should be covered by a social security system is care, health, and disease, old age, unemployment, labor accidents, family benefits, maternity, incapacity or disabled, survival, orphans, and tax costs for Social Security. But all of these things are difficult. The achievement is really being attained in a medium and long term. But we should have all these benefits, and we should say that this is difficult to achieve worldwide. Where are we regarding social security coverage worldwide? Well, the image comes from the report on social protection made by ILO for the year 2020 to year 2022. It counts for last year. It was published last year because the cut is on year 2022. Many countries have a social security system that is effective. Only 46.69% is covered. And watch out with this part, with at least one benefit of social security, despite that this figure might be important, or we believe it's important and we consider it as high. Well, take a look. This measure, 46.9% of the people are those that have access to at least one benefit deriving from social security benefits. If we analyze it that way, less than half of the worldwide population is covered, with the caveat that if we reach 46.9%, is that we are including all those people that are only receiving one benefit, and that would be healthcare assistance. This is very interesting as a report for those that are interested on this topic and all of a sudden have not had uh, read about these figures. Well, I think that it is important for you to see how we have the breakdown at a regional and worldwide level. Europe and Central Asia have better coverages. In the Americas, we are a little bit lagging behind, but the call and care right here, the call is that at a worldwide level, we are not reaching at least half of the people that should be covered. And this measurement is being done with all at only one benefit. We don't have family benefits or financial benefits. So these are people that are included in this 46.9% of people receiving health care. So this is just to give you a outlook of what is going at a worldwide level. So this is insufficient, and all of a sudden there has been some development going on, but it is a long run project. But we have tools at a domestic and international level that will enable us to reach higher numbers. What has happened in Colombia? Why do I bring about the Colombian case? Well, first, because in Colombia, we wanted to implement a social security protection floor, and that this experience could be good for other countries. So I would like to talk to you about the Colombia case to tell you how our social security system is talking without, and then talk about the social protection floors and why we were looking to creating it. The Colombian system has integrated by three subsystems: health, pensions, labor or professional risks that are as known in other countries, and complementary social services that are referring to the protections that come from family and subsidies to the elderly. On the health system, at this moment in time, we are talking that there is a crisis going on. There's a series of experts researching that are saying that the social security system of Colombia is undergoing a crisis. But beyond that, we can say that regarding the coverage, this system is around 98% of people. It doesn't happen the same thing for pensions or labor risk, because this system, by legal provisions and of the courts, has extended its coverage to the extent that it is an universal coverage given to all the inhabitants of the country, while pension and labor risk are limited to the persons that are performing an economic activity or that are receiving a wage that will be equal or higher than the minimum wage in effect. So for figures of around 1 year, the pension system was covering only 23% of the people that should be covering, the persons that have an age of working and retirement age. That is only covering 23% that should be receiving benefits from our pension system. Likewise, for labor risk, informality, unemployment, and others that are involved here. We know them because they appear in all the countries that are attending this conference. Coverage rates are being.
If we take into account that informality in Colombia, and I think this is not far-fetched from other countries in Latin America, is 56.3%. Two-thirds of the population that are working already in Colombia are doing an informal job. With this overview, in the year 2009, they designed and they promoted this figure, Social Security floors. So between 2009 and 2023, it was created and implemented a floor for social protection for those in the environment, in the domestic environment, for those people that were independent or dependent employees. Once again, in the design, we made a mistake because once again, we link coverage of this social protection floor, even though it was a tool to extend coverage for those that can have no access to the formal market. Then we link this to the enrollment for this social protection floor to those that had some link to this as a dependent or independent worker, but with partial work, working less than 47 hours per week. And therefore, they don't receive monthly a decent salary. Coverage, this social protection floor should be for those that have an income that is lower than the minimum wage, but at the same time for those that were having a formal job. And this was extended to people that were working in the informal market without capabilities to quote. However, they were not included in this tool for social protection floor. How this social protection floor is designed in Colombia, we have benefits for assistance. In Colombia, the healthcare system has two regimens, the contribution and the subsidy one. And these two regimes have exactly the same coverage. However, the people in the subsidiary system, they don't have benefits. The other ones, they have uh, motherhood, paternity rights, and holidays. Those that were carrying out these activities half time with a salary, even though they were going to have benefits in health, they were under the subsidy regimen, so they couldn't receive other benefits. They were excluded from all the economic benefits. Now, regarding the pension system, what did the system replace, quote unquote, what we call periodical reimbursement? In Colombia, by constitution law, Articles 48 and 49 states that there could not be a pension minimum than the current minimum wage. If that person make their contributions according to this monthly contribution, their replacement rate is going to be 100% because the minimum pension is of the current minimum wage. So what we did in order to replace this for workers, a system that is called periodical economic systems. This name stems from the idea that we are not going to break the Constitution. People can make a voluntary contribution, 10,000 pesos, for people that are not from Colombia, around $2, $3. They can save this every month, and the state is going to assign an incentive of 20% on top of these savings. So when they are in their retirement era, they would receive this every 2 months. But what is the problem or the difficulty with this mechanism of periodical? Well, this started in December 2022. The average uh, was 140,000 pesos, that are more or less $35. So this is what we wanted to replace with the pension system. Now, regarding the labor risk systems, we wanted to have an inclusive insurance that would protect the worker from risk coming from their works, but it had fixed contributions because in Colombia, this system grants pensions, grants benefits that are permanent, invalidity, survival rate, and some other uh, benefits. But here we are going to have fixed benefits. Only one time the contingency is presented. Before, what is happening with the quotation? We decide we design a 50% from the monthly income, and if there were workers that were independent from a contractor, the quotation corresponded to that person. So it was exactly the same for people that had a contract or a contract under civil law, because the contractor was in charge of doing the quotation, accounting for a 50% of their monthly income. 40% was going to be for the BEPS and 1% to fund labor risk funds, because the idea was to replace the labor risk insurance. And what happened with the social protection floor in Colombia? There were two analyses that the Constitutional Court made. One decision in the year 2021 that it was annulled, but not for essence issues, because it was a principle, unit of matter, that under the Colombia law, they say that the development plan designed by the Colombian government, they shouldn't include permanent guidelines that are going to change in the approach of Social Security. And because this was not considered as a general law, but part of the development plan designed by the executive, it was annulled, and the effects were deferred as of June 2023. And there was another decision that analyzed the essence of this. They wanted to remove this floor. They say that this social protection floor is precariousness, because first is going to create a parallel system for social security that for people that have less than the minimum wage, but the benefits not similar at all to the ones that the social security system is offering to the employer. So the Colombian court made this decision, saying that due to the design of this protection system, this figure was feasible and it was constitutional. So in a nutshell, the court argumented that by implementing a protection floor, the idea is to have a benchmark to formalize workers that since the very beginning are not under the coverage of social security schemes. With this, we are going to allow two things. First, to identify them and monitor them effectively, because as an employer, they are violating the rights of their employees the employees, and secondly, to cover people that traditionally have been excluded from the social security programs. These were the main arguments from the Constitutional Court in Colombia to declare that social protection floors were constitutional. And besides that, they were ensuring the implementation of the universality concepts that are so relevant in our countries. So besides this legal analysis, this figure presented some discussions that were affecting the practical things. A lot of unions, a lot of work organizations organized some manifestations in Colombia because they wanted to annul this floor. What were the main arguments to ask for the removal of this social protection floor that resulted in its elimination of the Constitution? The main arguments of the unions, uh, they were saying that it was precariousness for the workers and that it enabled flexible works. So this was affecting the social system. It has a minimum basis for quotation and salary. The benefits should be respecting as a minimum the current minimum wage. Therefore, workers that were making less than a minimum wage in order to be enrolled into this security system, they needed to be quoted with the minimum wage. So this is one of the factors that generated a lot of discussion because it was generating a lot of informality. However, from another approach, from union organizations, they mentioned that this was a figure that it was going to be useful to have a flexible contract, and many people that were already included in the social security system could be integrated in this social protection floor that included less and more restrictive benefits than the social security system. Arguments that promoted this figure were similar to the ones that the court expressed. Is better or is more beneficial for the country to enroll these people to a certain system than having them out of the system that traditionally have been informal in the informal market. So they decided to annul this figure. But for future implementations in other countries, these are discussions that have to be taken into account because this could happen when they can implement within their national development plan. Now, out of the Colombian approach, internationally speaking, what are the advantages that the implementation of these protection floors can provide us? The ILO made an analysis showing that these floors reduce faster extreme poverty, inequality, and social exclusion. This is similar to the argument that the Colombian court mentioned because there are people that have been excluded from public policies. They have been excluded from the coverage of social security programs. And as we all know, and there is an international consensus, people that are excluded, that have no protection from social security services have more risk to be part of the extreme poverty and to be socially excluded. So if you include them gradually, like an echelon where people can be moving up according to the system, is going to have this effect on reducing poverty. Secondly, in those countries where they develop this type of benefits for people that are interested in the study. Here you have the reference. But it was shown in the studies where the study was carried about that people or parents were not prone to take their children to work. So we have more enrollment, more studies. So that was the national average. And lastly, there was a growth in the internal market, in the domestic market. This is an effect that has been studied a lot in all the security systems. And you know this, the design, the implementation in the national territory of social security systems make people to be prone to invest in the internal market. Studies said that one person that knows that is protected before the basic risk, that if it's sick, is going to receive care, that it's if it's old, they are going to receive a periodic income. They are going to take more risk, and are not going to have a lot of preventing savings, as they call them in the studies of social security arena, to face these situations during their productive area. So then we are going to have better flow of resources and a better in domestic market. So internationally, they have found that there are evidence of this effect and its implementation. So we can say that social protection floors can become a tool to ensure the universality concept, because if we improve the mistakes that we made in the past, that I couldn't elaborate on that, but if we improve the mistakes, the lack of consensus and so forth, and if it's designed as a real social protection floor with the guidelines of the ILO, it can become a first step for that comprehensive floor. It is a reality. We know that not all the people, for many specificities of our legal framework, cannot have access to that benefit. So let's assume that reality, and we have to design these floors, because with this we are going to target and to structure properly all the social investment. Maybe this is the case of other countries in the region, but in Colombia we see this a lot. Many of the public policies are designed in an isolated manner. For example, the policy for drinkable water is isolated from the health care policy, and they are implemented independently. So creating a social protection floor with the minimum aspects that a person could have to be considered that is going to have a decent life, then we are going to create a unique structure, and we uh, name this on their constitution, that is the unit concept. So the design of public policies and all the social determinants that can affect this system of social security, or that can have an impact in the system, should be under the same authority, under the same line, under the same scheme. So this is another advantage that we found after implementing this social protections floor nationally. This figure, social protection floors, have been analyzed internationally, and currently we have a global coalition supporting social protection floors. This is an international organization that has conducted several surveys together with the ILO, and they have analyzed different countries in the region. And their proposal is even more ambitious. So not only to implement a social protection floor in the countries, they are inviting us to look for creating a social security system that is a global one. And as we know that there is an issue for funding this type of social protection systems worldwide. So they are proposing to create a social protection global fund. So this principle of solidarity that is so necessary in the social security systems, they say that this principle, taking into account this pillar, they are going to take it at a macro level. So those developed countries that have better systems and more resources can invest in that global fund for social security. So those countries that cannot create a perfect social security system, then we can start with the social protection floor. In the short term, this is an idea that is going to generate a lot of issues in its implementation. It's kind of complicated to implement. However, we should not disregard the fact that many scholars in the law are talking about creating a host of standards for international guidelines for the implementation of rights, the increase of production in some countries that have very low or poor laws, right? So, under this perspective, there is this global coalition for social protection floors is inviting us to create a global fund in order to implement properly this figure in domestic frameworks. And finally, I would like to link the implementation of social protection floors with the SDGs, because besides this proposal, the Global Coalition for Social Protection Floors conducted another study where they are mentioning why implementing social protection floors contributes to the accomplishment of SDGs. Which are the ones that are interesting for me? First, the end of poverty. SDG 1.3 aims for people to have at least minimum levels for social protection. I am going to be very repetitive, but we know that the social security systems are not enough. We know that extending coverage is an ideal. We are on the way, and we are still looking for implementing this fully. But in the short term, this is not going to be possible. So, in order to tackle down and to accomplish this SDG of ending poverty, we can start by creating social protection floors at least. Regarding health and well being, the idea is to have a universal sanitary coverage. So it is clear that the fact that during the design of social protection floors, they are including basic care of health contributes to accomplish this SDG. Regarding decent work and economic growth, the idea is to implement strategies to ensure work for young people and to provide job opportunities to disabled women and men. What does the implementation of social protection floors has to do with decent job? In Colombia, we articulated this with the job market, because one of the reasons for this social protection floor is to become a temporary and subsidiary system. Temporary because it's the first step. The idea is for people that are entering into this protection stemming out from the social protection floor are not going to stay there. They have to move upwards so they can be enrolled into the formal market, and eventually they can have a universal coverage. And meanwhile, this can be a complementary action. One of the components of the social protection floors should be policies for job market policies. I cannot separate this. We need to give to the people tools so they can reinsert into their labor market and they can exploit all their skills and capabilities. We also study the fact that social protection floor can help us to accomplish this SDG, decent work. Regarding gender equality, this item and in specific can be considered that it can be accomplished by implementing social protection floors because non rewarded works and domestic work can be recognized. Part of that recognition is to ensure a protection from Social Security. And if that's not possible, at least we can start by giving them minimum benefits for them to be able to have a decent life. So for those that usually are linked to the informal labor market, that usually have no access to the social system, social security system and benefits, we can recognize their work and we can include them in these social protection floors. So these are all the ideas that I wanted to share with you, and to share with you one of the studies that was carried out in the external university in Colombia. These figures have been developed since the year 2012, but it hasn't been explored deeply. Despite the fact that it started on the year 2012, currently we still have opportunities for its implementation, and we still have some gaps as the beginning. So we have an organization as the one that I mentioned to you, this Global Coalition for Social Protection Floors. And I think it's relevant to address this during this Social Security Week, because when we were looking for reference and sources, we realized that this is a subject matter that it's unexplored, to say so. But we couldn't find valuable papers about this information. We only found 4 of them. So it's important to take that into account as a tool that can be useful in order to implement and to develop this principle that we aim to in the Social Security arena. I would like to thank the organizing committee and the conference for having me here. Christian, thank you so much. Your presentation was very productive with a lot of information, and it's great to remember that the priority number 1 for this conference is universality on social security services. We have some questions from the social media, and with your presentation, we realize how a standard, how an international recommendation can be implemented in the national systems. And this is the first question. Well, I am going to ask you 2 questions. You will answer them, and at the end, I am going to ask you a different question. How these social protection floors can be adapted and customized to the social and economic realities of each of the countries, considering the fact that there's no unique way to implement these models of social protection, at least in the Latin American and Caribbean region. The second question, what is the role of civil society and NGOs to promote and to defend the social protection floors as a fundamental right? Can you answer those questions, please? Thank you.
I think the persons that have asked those questions, I find them quite interesting. And the first one is getting me into trouble because that's a topic that I wanted to show to you during my presentation. But if you realize at no moment in time I gave you the elements where you can say that social protection floor should be designed in a very specific way. And when we carry out internally or investigation at the university, we started to think, how are we going to be developing? How are we going to be landing it toward the people so they should know what is going to be integrated? How are we going to be designing it? What are the specifics for each country? That determination is a common denominator in all documents where we talk about social protection floors. Why? Because maybe I'm not answering your question completely, and maybe I'm answering your question with another question. But however, a consensus vis-a-vis the social security protection floor has to have a minimum, and the minimum has to do with the reality of each country. Likewise, for social security, they should be implemented according to the possibilities at a domestic level. So, to that regard, what will be the minimum standard that we have? Well, in principle, what the ILO has said. What I show you, I think it's a second slide that was referring to the recommendation 202 of ILO, at least benefits in healthcare and mechanism that will enable people to have access to the goods and services that are minimum to guarantee a decent life. And this is an abstract concept with another abstract concept here that is human dignity. What are the minimum standards for human dignity? That is why all documents, all studies, all papers, even the one that we elaborate here in at the university, what cannot happen. And that is one of the failures that we had during the implementation in Colombia, lack of consultation. And that led that or labor organizations we mobilizing to eliminate the social protection floor because in the concept we were going to be hiring in scarcity. So those floors should not be a mechanism of leak of person that should be pertaining to a formal social security system could be drawn out of there and move them over to social protection floor because their employer has found a cheaper way to be paying the fees for social protection floor instead of social protection security system. So in a formal setting of labor. So in to design this at a domestic level, you have to take into account ILO 202 recommendation, but it will depend on the legislation of the country and the legal possibilities, economical possibilities to put it in place. And regarding the second question, I wrote it down in order not to forget the role that civil society on NGs have to play. ONGs have to play. Well, Global Coalition for Social Security Floors. It is a very ambitious goal, and it is a proposal that is long term, but it is an innovative proposal. Maybe some say it's an utopia to have international cooperation and a global fund to put it into practice might be impossible, but it is an interesting proposal, though. And to bring it to a global level, maybe it's impossible, but maybe can lead to regional actions. Well, we need to have the consultation, help and assist with resources, help to bring together the states and create the scenarios of consultation. Even if it's not global, maybe regional projects can be created as many cooperation and trade agreements can be in place. Maybe that kind of things we can bring it over to social security protection floors. And that is why it's important to have NGOs involved in it, in addition to the involvement of civil society. Because we have a principle that is solidarity, that's create awareness in the citizenry. You have to have a sound basis of social protection floors, because if civil society does not agree in the implementation, then in practice it will be merely impossible to put in place. So this morning in Colombia, we cope with the news. Well, it had been announced yesterday, and we are aiming to quite radical pension changes. We have a distribution and capitalization systems that compete each other. The affiliates must be choosing. They cannot belong to the both systems. And those different regimes compete with each other. Why am I telling you this about our national reality? Because we want to have a system of pillars, and that is the reform that we want to undertake here in Colombia. But a very important item here is that many of the critics that are brought about this and many of the difficulties that the government has had in order to implement all the social reforms that they want to undertake is the lack of consensus. Weeks ago, the Congress stopped the reform. It was not approved, it was not passed, because there was a lack of consensus, a lack of information provided to civil society. And that is why it is important that people should understand that the reforms that we are intending to implement. Civil society plays a very important and critical role in order to implement all these figures at a domestic level. Thank you so much, Christian. And precisely, I believe that here at the conference, the statutes of the Andean sub-region to which the university pertains to, we need to bring a this acknowledgement to all these kind of reforms, either labor reforms or other reforms, not only for Colombia and the region, but I think that it has to be extended worldwide. But yes, we need to prevent social washing. There's a false social agenda that would be taking place. The last question that we were asked, and taking the objectives of the 2030 agenda, we know that after the pandemics of many academicians and decision makers have said that we will not be reaching our 2030 goals because of the pandemic effects. Many are thinking, what will be coming after this 2030 agenda? And the question that we are asked today, we have this vision that 2030 agenda has to be included and the objectives have to be moving forward hand in hand in order to be put in place. But some are related to social security. In a future agenda, after the 2030 agenda, whichever the name will be given by the United Nations, do you think that we have a specific objectives towards social protection or social security? Well, thank you for your question. Yes, of course I do. I do consider that in the studies that have been carried out, you have the relationship with the coverage extension of social security systems and the ODGs. This relationship, if you saw during my presentation, there were indirect cases, and I had to explain or make a brief comment about it because I wanted to give you the reference of what they have to do with the extension of Social Security coverage and Social Security system. Yes, we have the ODGs that are very specific health care for all individuals. We need to be very specific on Social Security matters. In order to answer the question, yes, I do believe it is necessary because that will be shedding the light to the states, will be giving that horizon to the states that want to be following up for the research or investigation that will have to be carrying out to how we can achieve all the ODGs. And it is going to be very useful. And the SDGs because we have these 2030 SDGs that have been established. But if you are talking about an SDG on Social Security, I do see an opportunity to move forward, unlike if we do it individually or apart. Well, if we don't have any questions here in the room, that those people attending on-site this conference, we will be closing our panel. And the intention of the week of having giving the floor to the academy, to the 4 universities that are part of our memberships, and how they can be hearing from the different profiles of our membership. On behalf of CISS, I want to thank you your participation. We are very happy to have the University of Externado with quite an engagement with us. And to our audience, we want to remind them that at noon sharp, we will have a panel organized by Administrative Service, the future of Social Security vis-a-vis uncertain scenarios. Thank you so much, Christian. It has been a pleasure to have you with us this morning. Thank you all. It has been a pleasure to make my presentation on social protection floor tool. Thank you, and I wish you the best for the rest of your agenda. Thank you. Goodbye.